Welcome. I'm Andrew.
I'm Russ.
And we are
The Secret Stacie.
Glad you could make it. We have a super guest today, Stacie Mallen, the founder of the Rebel Code. Stacie, tell us a little bit about yourself. What is the Rebel Code?
So the Rebel Code, I actually established Rules Make Rebels as a blog about 5 years ago while I was working with high growth startup companies. And it was really sort of how I was creating intentional culture in those organizations. So I wanted to just share my experience and my personal authentic experience of how I got into that work and how I got to work with all these great CEOs and these companies. So that evolved into a little bit of a different space of talking more about operational excellence, talking about leadership development, but also talking about how I am very passionate about how people in this space, the people space, the HR space, kind of get in their own way and don't always help businesses grow, but then complain about the fact that they're relegated to the sidelines. So some of the content you'll find is about them digging deep in some of what we're going to talk about today and finding their authentic self and their truth and being very vulnerable with that and how that actually allows you to connect on a more deep level with business and with leaders. I think we're taught from a very early age, especially in a practice like human resources, to not be yourself, that you should be guarded and you should have a persona. Right. And leaders have been taught that too, right? CEOs have been told that for
a certain way,
yeah, to just be a certain way. And so one of my goals is I think people do better work when they just show up as one person and as of themselves.
So there's a method to our madness. Obviously, you can see, we are the Secret Stacies, about sharing the story of this authenticity piece, the inside story, the story of the self-realizations you had to come within yourself to have success on the outside. And we find
the evolution.
And we find that most CEOs, most leaders, they don't share that story.
Right.
They have the story inside.
Right.
Never mind, they don't.
They've gone through that venture and that journey as well.
Inside themselves. Yeah. And you're teaching them to share it every day within the culture of a company. We're trying to create a show to share it to the world.
Right.
So, hence Stacie is our guest. So this authenticity piece, obviously you've had your own journey. Is there any part of that journey that you came to some significant moment in yourself, some great nexus of self-realization that had such an impact on everything else in the results in your life?
Yeah, so there were two, I think, for me, defining moments. I grew up very different than most people. And for most of my life, I feel like I was ashamed of that and insecure about the fact that I grew up different. And I grew up different because I was raised by my grandparents. And I was in the middle of Indiana. And everybody always asked me my whole life, well, are your parents passed away? So how do you answer that when you're 8 years old, right? So my whole life I sort of developed this story of what my truth was, but it wasn't really the truth. It was just your story. Yeah, right. It was just my story. What I came to recognize probably in, halfway through my career is I had this facade and sort of this tough exterior, right? I rode a motorcycle. I did all these things. I was tattooed. I had this really defensive posture in life. And when I started to understand that, my upbringing was actually such a gift that growing up different and growing up unafraid of being different. And then a month out of the summer, I went to the middle of Georgia. I tell this story when I speak. And I had to sort of assimilate into that culture. And then I would come out and visit my parents in Arizona, and I'd have to assimilate into this culture. And so what it created for me was a situation that sitting around an executive team And watching and listening and learning, I could really understand the dynamic of the team. I could understand sort of who is in power in the room. I could understand really the context of the organization at a different level than I think most people probably could. But I didn't recognize that as a strength probably until halfway through my 30s, where I was like, man, why can I walk into a room and really feel the energy a little bit different than other people?
So it was the self-realization of that gift that you had. Hence why you use the word gift.
Yes.
Because most people would carry that as sort of like the chains of Jacob Marley throughout their life. Mm-hmm. But you changed the very realization of that in your mind as a gift, because now you use that gift.
Yes.
Well, it's like so many other gifts that people discover along the way is you feel that that's just who you are and what it is in that particular situation. And then as you observe the people around you, you obviously come to the conclusion that it is a gift.
It is.
Because it's who you are, and it's the power that you bring to the table.
And I think in the practice, like to talk about the practice of human resources, I was always different in that practice. And so I think the gift for me too was because I was different my whole life, I was not afraid to be different in doing anything that I've ever done. So when I was at a big Fortune 50 company, for example, and I was in the human resources department, and I felt like I was always getting in trouble because I always was piping up on conference calls and speaking my opinion, I wasn't exactly afraid to do that because I had been doing that my whole life. I was not afraid to be an outlier because by design I was always an outlier, right?
Outside the box.
Right. And so
I wouldn't know anything about that.
Right.
Would you?
So that was the first realization. The second one, I don't know if you guys are familiar with a practice called NLP, Neuro Linguistic Programming. Yeah. And so I ended up getting certified in NLP because I had this very real experience with my own personal coach. She was walking me through an NLP exercise after I had left an organization, and I came to this realization. My mother, when I was a little tiny baby, actually had a very traumatic brain injury, and I was there with her for that traumatic brain injury. I was also born with a birth defect, so the first couple weeks of my life, I was in a hospital. I had a lot of pain in my life early on. So short story, through that exercise, I was able to sort of dig into also why I was really professionally successful, but in my personal life, I had some challenges. I've been married a couple of times, other things. So I was able to dig in, and I think that's the other piece of me was kind of bringing together, as I stated in the very beginning, like I'm one person, this personal life that I had and this professional persona that I had. There's strength in everything that I've been through, and to be able to bring those worlds together.
So that's a good segue into, I think, my next question. So something we often talk about is this alignment piece. Mm-hmm. But what most people don't talk about, they talk about it within a culture and a company. Something I always say is you have to align yourself with yourself first.
Yeah.
So it sounds to me that that's kind of the journey that you went on.
Yeah.
Is aligning yourself with yourself. I mean, if you were to give advice to someone on how to do that, how to align yourself with, and what does it even mean? How would you address that?
When I coach people, the first thing I tell them to do, I take them through an exercise, and this is really simple. It's hard for people, like if you ask people, what's your purpose? What are you supposed to be doing? They just don't, it's hard to start there, right? So I think it's easier to take somebody through almost like an NLP-like exercise and ask them, tell me about your very favorite day of your whole life, right? What did you do? How did it feel? Who were you with? Like, tell me about that. Because what you get to in that moment for them is what really matters to them. How they like to feel, who they like to be with, like what, and then talking them through, okay, if that's how you like to feel, what are the things that you do today that help make you feel closer to that place? And so that's how I usually start with people, is trying to get them to align with what makes them feel really good about themselves, what drives them, what gets them really fired up, and then what are the things that they can do in the context of their own world. The other thing is to really think about everything, to double down on your strengths. I know everybody's heard this story, right? Your kid comes home with an A, 3 C's and an F. What do you focus on? Well, most people would say the F, right? But the theory that actually is more prevalent at this point is to focus on the A, right? What is that person really gifted at? So sometimes I'll talk to leaders and they'll say, I'm really bad at confrontation. Okay, well, let's talk about what you're good at, right? First of all, nobody's good at confrontation unless you're a jerk. Unless you love it and then you're kind of...
Maybe the president.
Yeah, well, like I said, by definition, right? You're probably, out either a narcissist or out looking for confrontation. Nobody walks around hopefully doing that, or the people that do aren't people you want to work with. So we focus on, if your strength is that you're a bridge builder, your strength is that you see the best in people, focus on that. And there's still a way to be direct with people and have direct conversations with them, but come from a place of compassion and concern. So for example, there's a book, Radical Candor, that I hooked onto a while ago because I think it's such a great construct for leaders to care deeply and challenge directly. I think that's the intersection of where really good stuff happens. And Kim Scott talks about the fact that if you can sit in the quadrant of people understanding how deeply you care about them, but as we've been talking, as you guys talk about, and this is sort of the format of the show, people can't ever feel that way if you're not real, if you're not authentic, and if you're not yourself.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I want to talk, with that point, I think it's interesting because you brought up something earlier that, a lot of leaders only fit into one quadrant, even though they're an entire person with multiple dimensions. And so how do you get past that, or how have you gone from, the tough girl, guarded, in your face kind of thing?
And you're so vulnerable now,
and
open.
Yeah, and changed and evolved into that. What was the change that you went through, or, you went through the NLP? There are some things that probably happened. Is that something you can draw out of leaders?
Yeah, I just wrote a blog about this because someone said to me one time that if you know your eyes are blue, you'll never have to argue with anybody about what color your eyes are.
They're looking at me.
Yeah. And my eyes are grayish blue.
Yeah.
And what that means is, it's really, to me, the biggest challenge for leaders is believing in themselves.
Yeah.
And so when I was in my 20s, the way I describe it is, if somebody said your eyes are brown, instead of arguing, I would just punch them in the face. Right? I would say,
I won't mess with you,
right.
I promise.
And then I would stand over the top of them and say, my eyes are blue, right? And then in my 30s, I sort of evolved to this place of maybe yelling or, being slightly less aggressive, but still defensive. Like, you're still in this defensive place because you don't really believe it yourself. And then when you get to this evolution of really believing it, of believing that you're good at what you do and you understand your strengths and you understand where you come from.
That you actually have a gift.
Yes. Then you're not defensive. If somebody comes to you and says your eyes are brown, you're like, okay, I can understand maybe with the light that you don't really see me for who I am, but I know who I am.
Yeah.
And then you don't have to punch them in the face or yell at them, right? Yeah. But there's always a time and a place, and I said this with a leader recently that I was in a situation, and I was sort of yelling that my eyes were blue in the situation, and he said to me, he said, you seem like you're aggressive about that. I said, yeah, I am. I said, you're really having me call into question who I am, and so I'm getting defensive. And he's like, well, that's really self-aware. I said, well, that's part of being a leader, is being self-aware. But I said, anybody that gets backed into a corner, you're never going to be perfect. Anybody that gets backed into a corner in any way, shape, or form is going to default to old behavior.
Right.
You're never going to be perfect. So you end up kind of falling backwards and so you just have to be aware of what that behavior is and be able to call yourself accountable right, in that moment and say,
So what do you do to practice self-awareness?
That is so funny. I
And
was just going to ask about practice.
so self-awareness takes a little bit of discipline.
Yeah.
It takes a little bit of
Yeah, it does.
vulnerability. It takes, hey, I don't have my shit together here today,
Right.
and honesty. So how is there a practice
Yeah,
that you go through?
give
or-
them advice, because something I say is that if you're not practicing something,
Right.
what are you getting good at?
right,
And most people practice something out here, right? But they don't practice
in here.
the shit in here. So I know you do that. Can you explain like something maybe you do
Yeah.
and share that with
yeah.
our
So
audience?
the big thing that changed my life is meditation, but we won't talk about meditation because you tell people meditation, they themselves glaze over. But I do think it's made
do the same.
Yeah, a lot of people that are very self-aware do that work because I think it's an opportunity every day to reflect on wherever you want to be and visualize and those things. But something that's very tangible is every time you walk into a meeting, walk into that meeting with the intent you're going to change your mind about something, that you're going to listen more than you speak, that you're going to really absorb the energy and the human beings. And I think if you walk into a meeting and that's your intention every single time, the way that you show up will be completely different than the way that you would had you not set that intention. And I think that's a very tangible thing that I coach leaders on all the time. The next time you walk into a meeting, you understand that you are going to change your mind about something, that there's something that you don't completely understand, that you listen 80% and only talk 20%, and that you really listen and absorb the human beings in the room.
So here's what, meditation, self-awareness, I think affords people. Marcus Aurelius, a Caesar of Rome, wrote a very famous book, I believe it was called Meditations. And he used to play this game with himself called the equanimity game, where he would go in with that intention. Now, being the leader of Rome is not an easy thing. You can start your day with a certain intention. But he knew that even though he started his day in a positive centered place, or whatever intention that was, he knew that stuff was going to be thrown at him and he was going to not be in his. And what he would try to do was recognize that he was not there, and he would practice how fast he would recognize it and then how fast he could get back.
Right.
Is that something that resonates with you?
Yes. Yeah, I think you have to, it's a mindfulness practice. All of this is mindfulness, being very aware. And I think the reality is a lot of people unfortunately walk around in their bubble being very unaware.
Yeah.
Which is not a judgment. I think that is a completely normal thing to do. We're all wrapped up in our own lives, right?
Yeah.
For myself, I have 4 dogs. Last night we decided to get a cat because we were crazy. I have 3 kids. I have a husband, right? Like everybody has their life,
Yeah.
and so it would be unrealistic to say people are mindful all the time. But I think what you're talking about is just a practice of
There's a practice you can
right
actually
a
do.
rhythm, and so find a rhythm. Everybody finds their own rhythm. Like I do meditation every morning. I work out every morning. I have a journal that I do every morning, and then every night I have a ritual to wind down and go to bed.
Yep.
And that, I think, if you look at the most successful people, they have a
Yes.
ritual, right? They have a ritual. And
a lot
rhythm.
of what they do is a lot of that.
Yeah.
And so, wow, I can't thank you enough. I mean, this was exactly the stuff we wanted to
Thank
talk
you so
about.
much for being
I'm
here today.
so grateful. How can people get in touch with you?
So I'm a principal consultant with Execute to Win. You can also find me on therebelcode.com. That's the easiest way to find me. Where I'm going to be speaking, what I'm going to be doing. But Execute to Win is a software product where we help businesses put in a management operating system that optimizes their business, and then we have a leadership development product. I'm very grateful to work there because we get to go in and do this work We consult and coach leaders and help them really make the most of their business. And that to me is like the biggest gift
Awesome.
to
Yes,
help
yes.
others to do things better.
You're
So,
Continue
Aligning-
practicing.
yes, exactly.
You're working in alignment with yourself.
That's
and
right.
With what you do.
I love it. I love it.
Well, we thank you. I'm Andrew Kolikoff. If you want to reach me, my email is andrew@OptimumHQ. Optimum is the world's first business solutions platform, customized software, and even ERP at a fraction of the time and a fraction of the cost. And
And I'm Russ Johns, and we are Adora Creative, and we help you expand your marketing, media, and produce shows just like
good
this.
shit.
Good shit.
Awesome. Well, thank you
Thank you.
again. We'll see you at our next show.
Appreciate it.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Hi, I'm Andrew,
I'm Russ.
and we are the
Secret
Secret Sauciers.
We're here to bring you valuable information that can help you move your life forward.
And your business forward. And those realizations come from within you, and we're sharing that with you through our interviews with executives. So please tune in.
Subscribe to the channel and join us weekly.
Thank you.